So today I'm happy to announce our new speaker. It's Akkad. He's a professor of classical sciences here at or how do you say? Here at the Faculty of Philosophy, Department of Classical Research. Interests are mostly around Greek language and Greek literature in late antiquity. Today, Il is going to talk about elements of popular beliefs in John Moschus. The Zoom is yours, Il.
Thank you very much, Liliana. First of all, I'll need to apologize for the walls of text I'll be throwing at you. There will be a lot of text. And because I realized maybe too late that I'll be talking about things not many of you have read before. So I hope you'll excuse me for that. I also realized that I should first start by saying a thing or two about John Moschus and the reason why he's important at all. And why his work, The Spiritual Meadow, is important as well. We have no idea when the man was born. He was born probably somewhere in Asia Minor, in the probably late or middling 6th century. We are not completely sure about the date of his death, although he either in 619 or 634. It's a matter of indiction. That's why there are 15 years apart between the two probable dates of his death. He certainly died in Rome. He left us a collection of tales he gathered while traveling all along the Roman Middle East. He traveled with a companion that was his disciple Sophronius. And this Sophronius was to be the future patriarch of Jerusalem, and he's a very important church writer in his own right. Whether he contributed to the meadow, we don't know. There are many manuscripts which name him as the primary author, but the minority, I think, is right in contributing the whole thing to John Moschus. They were traveling throughout the Middle East in the early years of the 7th century, but their travels were not a matter of sightseeing. They were actually escaping before a Persian invasion. That was the last great war between the two empires, which left them both weakened and finally saw them almost destroy each other and left this space for the Arabic invasions to take place in the power vacuum which ensued. We don't see almost anything of this Persian menace in Moschus's Spiritual Meadow, and that must be by design. He must have, by purpose, chosen not to say anything about the present problems of the world. When they finally arrived first at Alexandria and then at Rome, where probably the matter was finalized, John died. And he left his disciple with the task of bringing his body back to Palestine to be buried at his monastery of Saint Theodosius near Jerusalem, which Sophronius did. And now he's there in St. Theodosius still. That might be the only place in the world where he's venerated as a saint, on the same day as Sophronius is. Sophronius then became the Patriarch of Jerusalem, and he was the one who led the defense of the city against the Arabs. And he was the one who negotiated the final terms of surrender and left the first Khalifa into the city, and died a few years later, they say, of broken heart. He couldn't stand seeing the changes happening all around him. That is exactly the reason why the meadow is the spiritual meadow is so important. That's the last snapshot of the Roman Middle East before the curtain fell. That's the last we'll see of the Roman Middle East forever. And it was written in the last decade or so of the existence of, the Roman state and everything that goes with it in that area. And it is a very vivid picture. It's a collection of stories about mostly monks, or stories that monks told to John and his young disciple. John is a good writer. He writes simply, deceptively simply. It takes a few readings for you to understand how artful his simplicity is. He's always clear and knows how to put things as clearly and as simply as possible. That's not what we see, or what we always see with those late monastic writers. They can sometimes lose their way through a narrative. He seems to have been able to write a much more, I don't like the term, but a much more highbrow work than he actually did, but he chose not to. Now, the term popular religion I use in the used for this talk needs some explaining. It is a leftover from a now outdated model, from a number of now outdated models, but I use it on purpose. I want to use it to refer to beliefs and practices, some of which, but not all, would perhaps be considered superstitious. What I shall call popular religion in this context would be a set, but not a system, of beliefs or practices which imply a worldview different from the one that the majority avowedly hold. A modern parallel would be the widespread belief in astrology. The world in which astrology makes sense is one of the Ptolemaic universe, with Earth at its center, or the bottom if you prefer, with movable stars, that is planets, the sun and the moon moving around it, each on its sphere. However, the great majority of those who believe in horoscopes are aware of the fact that the Earth orbits the sun, and not vice versa. And yet they can hold these two opposing views simultaneously. That is why I don't see popular religion as a sort of opposition to the prevailing theories of the time in question. It is more like an accretion of practices, or even of ways of speaking from various sources. Some are, no doubt, ancient survivals, others began as simple misunderstandings or simplifications of complex explanations. Let us take, for example, the belief that demons cause sickness. Although at first glance, this is an explanation which seems to be very similar to the modern conspiracy theories about the artificial origin of coronavirus and such. In the late Antiquity, it was one of the competing ways of explaining disease. One apparently held by Procopius in his History of the Wars, and also by other historians of the period. Let me now share my presentations, and no, that's not it. And the first slides. I'm sorry, the centenarian has awoken. Izadzi.
Is it twin? It is Ajim.
I have
Okay.
I have a centenarian at large. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Don't worry.
Now, this is a passage, I'll show you too, from Procopius and his History of Wars, from the second book. Let me read the translation. If anyone wants to read Greek, it's in the smaller font at the top. And he says, during these times there was a pestilence by which the whole human race came near to being annihilated. Now, in the case of all other scourges sent from heaven, I don't agree with every particular of this translation. Procopius doesn't really say scourge sent from heaven. He's not as explicit as the translation makes it out to be. Some explanations of a cause might be given by daring men, such as the many theories propounded by those who are clever in these matters. For they love to conjure up causes which are absolutely incomprehensible to man, and to fabricate outlandish theories of natural philosophy, knowing well that they are saying nothing sound, but considering it sufficient for them if they completely deceive by their argument some of those whom they meet and persuade them to their view. But for this calamity it is quite impossible either to express in words or to conceive in thought any explanation, except indeed refer it to God. Refer it to God is ambiguous, and I propose it's purposefully ambiguous. It may mean refer the calamity to God, or refer the explaining to God. Let him explain it. For it did not come in a part of the world, nor upon certain men, nor did it confine itself to any season of the year, so that from such circumstances it might be possible to find subtle explanations of cause, but it embraced the entire world and blighted the lives of all men, though differing from one another in the most marked degree, respecting neither sex nor age. For much as men differ with regard to places in which they live, or in the law of their daily life, or it doesn't say the law of their daily life, it says something a bit different, and I think the difference is important. It's nomodietas, I'll try and find it in the text. That means the way of life, simply. The way they live, what they eat when they sleep. And nomos is not law here, it's more of something akin to tradition, not a law of their daily life, or in natural bent, or in active pursuits, or in whatever else man differs from men. In the case of this disease alone, the difference availed naught. And then further, and it came as follows: apparitions of supernatural beings in human guise of every description were seen by many persons, and those who encountered them thought that they were struck by the man they had met in this or that part of the body as it happened. And immediately upon seeing this apparition, they were seized also by the disease. Now at first those who met these creatures tried to turn them aside by uttering the holiest of names and exercising them in other ways as well as each one could. But they accomplished absolutely nothing, for even in sanctuaries, where most of them fled for refuge, they were dying constantly. But later on, they were unwilling even to give heed to their friends when they called to them, and they shut themselves up in their rooms and pretended that they did not hear, although their doors were being beaten down, fearing obviously that he who was calling was one of those demons. But in the case of some, the pestilence did not come in this way, but they saw in a vision in a dream, and seemed to suffer the very same thing at the hands of the creature who stood over them, or else to hear a voice foretelling to them that they were to die. But with the majority, it came about that they were seized by the disease without becoming aware of what was coming, either through a waking vision or a dream. That's Jung's translation. This does not come under the heading of popular beliefs or religion. It's very much mainstream. This is not necessarily a sign of some kind of anti-rational feelings in the mid-6th century. It might be quite the opposite. The alternative explanations, as Procopius says, given by both medical authorities and by astrologers, may have been even less rational than the demonic explanations. If disease should be explained as a disbalance of bodily humors, for example, then how should it come to affect, as he said, people of different humoral constitutions, ways of eating? That means they take foods of different humoral content, and which is as important, people of different regions with different mixtures of airs and waters, which are also important for the theory of humors. On the other hand, there were many reported sightings of demons, which followed every single later outbreak of plague in Europe. However, Procopius does not sound completely convinced even by this. There is an important nuance here, and as we shall see in some later examples, that the demons may cause disease, but only because they're allowed to cause it. The disease is ultimately God's punishment on a sinful world. What then would we consider popular religion? The obvious candidates would be those practices explicitly forbidden by, say, church councils. An example would be the celebration of Calende, not the same as Calendar, but the New Year celebrations with associated mummery. These were, along with some other pagan festivals, forbidden by the canons of the Council in Trulli in the 7th century. And here is the canon, which says that the calends and some other still pagan celebrations are to be completely forbidden. And if anyone should be found celebrating them, they would be, if priest, lose their priesthood, and if laymen, they should be cut off from the church, from Eucharist. Now, there are some commentaries on these canons, most notably in the 12th century, the titular patriarch of Antioch, Theodore Valsemon, wrote a series of commentaries, and in those it becomes very obvious that the canons were still very much in vogue in his day. They were still being practiced in one way or another until the very modern period. Maybe in some parts of Greece they still are celebrated in some way. So that would be a popular practice or a set of beliefs which contravenes the church legislature. However, although this postdates Moschus, it mostly covers the previously agreed upon things. So canons were never really very much beloved by the church. And there is nothing in John Moschus that is directly in opposition to any canons of church decisions or even state decisions concerning church practices. So it's no surprise that there is nothing of the sort in his work. But if there is nothing to contradict church legislature, is there anything which is going against tradition or more general teachings? Maybe. This may be a gray area a bit, as the visions of, for example, the non-saintly dead enduring their punishment, like in the following example, were often mentioned in the hagiographic literature. So let's see an example. And I'll read this one in full. When we came to the Thebaid, one of the elders told us, elder being the normal translation for the Greek hieron, which doesn't necessarily mean that the man was old, but he was a venerable monk. So one of the elders told us that there was an elder of great repute living outside the city of Antinoe, one who had kept his cell for about 70 years. He had 10 disciples, but one of them was very careless so far as his own soul was concerned. The elder often besought and entreated him, saying, "Brother, pay attention to your own soul, for death awaits you and the road to punishment." The brother always disregarded the elder, refusing to accept what was said by him. Well, after a time, death carried the brother off, and the elder was deeply troubled on his account, knowing that he had left this world sadly lacking in faith and devotion. The elder fell to his prayers and said, "Lord Jesus Christ, our true Lord, reveal to me the state of the brother's soul." He went into a trance, into an ecstasy, and saw a river of fire with a multitude of people in the fire itself. Right in the middle was the brother, submerged up to his neck. The elder said to him, "Was it not because of this retribution that I called on you to look after your own soul, my child?" The brother answered and said to the elder, "I thank God, Father, that there is relief from my head. Thanks to your prayers, I'm standing on the head of a bishop." Now, The funny thing is, I've known this story for much longer than I've known for John Moschus. I read it as a child in a collection of jokes written in the 80s here. Of course, it had nothing to do with any church personalities. Those were some politicians. But the story remains the same. It's highly unlikely that the joke itself came directly to into that collection. There must have been a few steps in between. And now the dog needs to. I'm sorry. I have a centenarian and a small but rather loud dog around. So, yes, there must have been some stepping stones in between. I have no idea which those could be. But although this story is a bit tongue-in-cheek as far as the beliefs of the afterlife are concerned, it is thoroughly unproblematic. However, some tales from a contemporary Latin collection of stories, and let's move to that, very similar in spirit to the Meadow and written by Pope Gregory the Great, called the Dialogues. The Dialogues were sometime later translated into Greek by another pope, Pope Zachary, and that's the collection of stories which gave Pope Gregory his Greek sobriquet of to Dialogo, he who wrote the dialogue. But these stories are a bit more provocative. I chose one of a couple of very similar ones. Now, to summarize, there was a dispute in matter of papal succession between two potential popes, and one of the deacons of the Roman deacons, Paschasius, opted for the wrong candidate. Sometime later, a venerable bishop went, it says, to the baths. And in those baths, it says, as he entered the hot baths, he found the deacon Paschasius standing there as an attendant. Germanus was shocked and asked what a man of his dignity was doing in such a place. Of his dignity and status, he was dead at the time. The only reason I'm serving here, the deacon answered, is that I endorse the party of Lawrence against Symmachus. But I beg you, pray for me to the Lord. When you come back and no longer find me here, you will know that your prayers have been heard. Germanus therefore gave himself to fervent prayer, and when he returned a few days later, Paschasius no longer appeared. This purification from sin after death was possible because the deacon had sinned through ignorance and not through malice. What we are to believe is that through his previous alms deeds, he obtained the grace of receiving forgiveness at a time when he was no longer able to do meritorious works. There is, in the same fourth book of the Dialogues, a very similar story about another dead soul toiling away at a public bath, which was apparently not the best work environment in the late antiquity. And the whole of the fourth book speaks about the afterlife, and it is a veritable theological minefield. This story in particular seems to be a step further from those visions of otherworldly suffering mentioned before, because these ghosts are not in the other world, they're here. They're almost palpable and in Rome. However, after this step, John Moschus goes even further in some of his stories. Let's see. This is a part from a story John and Sophronius, say they heard in Alexandria. They were listening one day to three blind men talking about how each one of them came to be affected by his blindness. The first two had one of them had glaucoma, the other one had a work-related injury, he was a glassblower, and then the third one shares his story. It says, well, now I will tell you. When I was a young man, I thoroughly detested work. So I became a prodigal, as one does. When it came to the point where I had nothing to eat, I resorted to theft. One day, after I had accomplished many deeds of wickedness, I was standing in the marketplace and I saw a richly decked out corpse being taken for burial. I followed the cortege to see where they were going to bury the body. They went behind St. John's Church and placed it in a sepulchre. Then they went their way. When I saw that everyone had gone, I went into the sepulchre and stripped the corpse of all its clothes except for a single shroud. As I was leaving the sepulchre, taking a considerable amount of booty with me, my evil habits said to me, "Take the shroud too, it's worth the trouble." So, wretched that I am, I turned back and removed the shroud from the corpse, leaving it naked, at which point the dead man sat up before me and stretched out his hands towards me. With his fingers, he clawed my face and plucked out both my eyes. I cravenly left all behind and fled from the sepulchre, badly hurt and chilled with horror. Now too, I too have told you how I came to be blind. And another one, which I already cut to size, and you'll see some ellipses here. It seems to be just another variant of the same story, but it differs in some very important aspects. A man came to a monk in the middle of the night asking to be shrived as soon as possible, and if possible to be made a monk at once. And now this is what he says to the priest, to the monk. Abba, I who am full of sin, sir, and unworthy of heaven and earth. 2 days ago, I heard of the death of the maiden daughter of somebody of first rank in the city. Also, that she had been buried in many clothes in a sepulchre outside the city. Now, I was already in the habit of doing the forbidden deed of robbing graves. I went to the sepulchre by night and began stripping the corpse. I stripped her of all she wore, not even leaving the innermost little garment, by taking that from her too and making her as naked as the day she was born. Just before I was about to leave the tomb, she sat up before me and stretched out her left hand. She took hold of my right hand and said, "Oh man, did you have to strip me naked? Have you no fear of God? Ought you not to have had pity on me in death? Should you not respect my sex? How can you, as a Christian, condemn me to presenting myself naked before Christ? Because you had so little respect for my sex. Is mine not the sex which gave birth? Do not outrage your own mother in so using me. Wretched man, what sort of a defense will you offer for this crime against me when you come to the terrifying judgment seat of Christ? As long as I lived, no strange man ever saw my face, and now, after death and burial, you have stripped me and looked upon my naked body. What is there to be said for humanity when it can stoop to such depths? What a heart, what hands you are going to have when you come to receive the holy body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ." When I heard and saw this, I was seized by fear and dread. Quaking, I said to her, "Let me go, and never again will I do this." But she said, "You came in here when you wanted to, but you will not go out of here as you will. This tomb shall be shared by the two of us, and do not think that you are going to die right away. Only after many days of torment will you, in evil circumstances, surrender your soul." She, of course, let him go under the oath that he will at once become a monk, and that he will not even go to his own house, but search for some place where he could be, first of all, shriven, and then made into a monk. Now, first of all, what's important here? The common assumption in the late antiquity is that body by itself is dead matter. It needs soul to give it life. Pope Gregory, of the previous two stories, says as much very explicitly. Presumably, a body could be possessed by a demon, but there is no such explanation here. It seems, especially in the second version, because the two seem, as I said, to be merely versions of the same story, that the body either works of its own accord, or that the soul, because the body in the other example speaks, and speech is characteristic of rational beings, and the rational element in a human is his rational soul. So soul apparently still lingered in the vicinity of the body, and the connection between the soul and the body is still not fully severed. Now, I'm not saying that has anything to do with the fact that these stories were written in Egypt, but I'll just leave this here. At any rate, the explanation, or the lack of explanation, given for the peculiar liveliness of the two corpses is, I think, a very important thing. That, at least, would suggest some sort of a popular belief in the Walking Dead. Now, we said that there needs to be some sort of, if not then a clash between what is avowedly held by the majority and the set of beliefs seen in a story or in one of its elements. And there can be direct evidence of such a disapproval. First of all, someone had to write the manuscripts we had, and sometimes the scribes would leave angry or approving in the margins. Then there are cases in which the scribe obviously had some qualms about the text he was writing. This sort of evidence is difficult, especially in the case of the Meadow, because there is no good critical edition available. We're still using is almost 500 years old, and there is no critical apparatus in it of any sort. So in order to see what happens, we need to go to the manuscripts. And there is another difficulty. The transmission of the Platon, of the Spiritual Meadow, is a particularly difficult case. Classical or post-classical, and again, I dislike the term, highbrow texts were being transcribed as faithfully as possible. Those more popular, like this one, they were more like modern bestsellers, the Meadow and that sort of literature. If for example, collection of homilies by St. John Chrysostom enjoys as much prestige as would a classical novel today. The best modern analogy for these collections are either those self-help books or some sort of pulp stories from the past decades. Now, these more popular works were, so to speak, out of copyright. Everyone felt that they could add a portion or remove another or rearrange the sentences or improve the author's choice of words. And it is exactly because of this that we can glean something of the scribe's attitude. Unfortunately, such interventions are by and large undateable. Sometimes, when there are additional errors in the transmission of the part which was so changed, we can reasonably assume that the intervention had already taken place in the exemplar from which the copy in front of us has been made. But that is probably the limit to what we can know. With this in mind, let us have a look at this particular reading. At the top is the only edition of the Meadow with the translation by John Berkeley. The important part is highlighted in Greek. Είχον γάρφησιν, εγώ πάθος ανίατον, ουδείς των ιατρών θεραπεύσου ειδηνήθη. Ελθόντα με ούν, ευθύς ο γέρον ευξάμενος εθεράπευσεν. Which means I had an incurable disease which no doctor was able to heal. The elder prayed and healed me. In this prayed and healed me, there will be a huge difference as soon as I arrived. In one of the most important manuscripts of the Meadow, in Parisinus Graecus 1596, as it says here, it says this: Ελθόντεσουν παρεκάλων αυτόν ποιήσε ευχήν υπέρ μου, όπως ρίσετε με, Κύριος, εκ του ανιάτου ου ήχον πάθους, και δι εήξας ο γέρον τη παρακλήση ημών, ύvξατο και ευθέως εθεράπευσέ με. Which means, in my own translation, when they arrived, they began asking him to pray for me so that the Lord would save me from the incurable disease I had. And at last, the elder yielded to their asking and prayed, and he at once healed me. The difference seems at first too subtle to bear the weight I'm trying to put on it. Consider this, though. First of all, the additional material is peculiar to this manuscript. Even the supposedly closely related Parisianus Graecus 1605, they represent the same manuscript tradition, does not share this reading. Secondly, the additional material is also very obviously written in a considerably more elevated stylistic register with an opus riseteme here, final clause, which seems to be even construed with a future indicative, which is, although in classical language it's not really used exactly like this, it's still an archaism and a deliberate one, obviously. It's stylistically motivated very much. And so is this eixas, kedi eixas here, which is a Homeric word, a poetic word. Nowhere else used by Moschus, because this wasn't written by him. So the last part of the sentence, this and he at once healed me, looks very similarly to that prayed and healed me in the majority reading. Ευξάμενος εθεράπευσεν is majority. Ivxato και Theos εθεράπευσέμε. However, there is a big difference. The Greek implies that the subjects of ivxato and of etherapeuse, the subjects of prayed and healed me, are different. If they were to be the same, if they were to be interpreted as the same, it would have been put more like in the majority reading in this ευξάμενος, which is a participle, and etherapeuse, which is a finite verb. That's an ambiguity, a bit of an ambiguity I tried to show in the translation by capitalizing the H in he. The normal way for a reader or a listener to interpret this passage would be that the one doing the actual healing is the Lord, and that the elder is the one doing the praying. That again seems to be important. Now, the rest of this story is, in this particular manuscript, is unfortunately illegible because the next leaf, the other side of the same leaf, in fact, is too damaged by dampness. So from some tantalizing glimpses, some words that still show on the page, there seem to be some more differences in the two stories, but I cannot tell which differences. It's completely illegible. From this, it would seem that someone took offense at the implication that the holy old man cured disease by his own power and went out of his way to preclude anyone from coming to such a conclusion. This seems a bit excessive because such language has always been common in hagiography. It is also very apparent that the saints themselves, at least after they've died, had at least something to do with the miracles. There seem to be something more than mere conduits of divine power. Their miracles often show a personal touch. The most characteristic example I know of this is Saint Artemius, a saint of the Arian epoch, to whom are ascribed a number of miracles described in a 7th century work written in Constantinople, which are unique for their peculiar, sometimes even crude sense of humor, and yet someone's religious sensibility took offense at this sort of language. Now, his view may have been a touch pedantic, but he's unlikely to have been alone in this. There was a tension, and this tension was addressed in this intervention. Now, finally, there is another possible criterion, which may at first glance seem too broad to be useful, and there are some assumptions which should first be made. There are stories which seem to be unmotivated. They come out of the blue. They contain elements unique to themselves or otherwise inexplicable, and the reader is left puzzled. The logic here is this: a story needs motivation, a reason for existence, and the writer would generally assume that the readers would understand the story in some way. This is true even of the apocalyptic and prophetic literature of the time. So a fortiori about less cryptic kinds of literature, of course. Even if the writer is merely presenting us with something they once heard, the story must have meant something for the narrator. Even when the narrator was unsure how to understand something, the problem was more likely to be that there were multiple explanations than that there were none. And if even we take from the, let's take for example, for a moment, that even if there was some supernatural force making something happen, even that supernatural force would have to assume that people would understand what they're seeing in some way. Of course, when that happens and we don't understand what's happening, we should presume that there is something missing, that we miss some clue, or we don't know something, and that is why we can't understand it. Of course, there's a possibility that simply some tales are tales of sounds and fury told by idiots signifying nothing, but that should be our last assumption, and that is actually an admission of defeat more than anything else. That's not an explanation. Stories which are so completely puzzling are rare, but they can be found in a wide range of authors. For example, let's take this very much edited for reasons of time, space, and decorum. Story from Moschus' a bit younger contemporary, Theophilactus Simokatis. Simokatis is here not a family name, it's his nickname, which means snub-nosed cat. Some 2 pages of text were here cut up to make this short section. Here, Theophilactus describes a vision of 2 huge human-like creatures which rose from the Nile. And he doesn't give us a single explanation. Even the commander, the prefect of Alexandria, who had the vision, and he wasn't alone, wasn't sure. So he, first of all, he says, pelted them with oaths, and told them if they were demonic, they should just go away in peace, and if they were from God, then they should stay here and let everyone see them. But Theophilactus gives us another possible explanation, that these 2 creatures are the Nile itself, the deity of Nile. Theophilactus is not the only one who gave us this story. Georgius Monachus probably takes it from him, but he has his own explanation to give us, that these 2 creatures were sirens. There is nothing in Theophilactus's account which would let us believe anything of the sort. They had very pleasant voices, whereas Theophilactus says they were silent. Besides, the important things in Georgius seems to be that when those creatures sank under the waters, crocodiles rose and killed a lot of people, and then he goes on to speak a lot about crocodiles, and then about otters who supposedly kill crocodiles, and then he's off on another tangent. At the almost same time, another writer, this time in Coptic, but preserved only in Ethiopian, John of Nicaea, has more or less the same thing to tell us. And he comes closest to giving some certain explanation. He takes it as the work of demons who dwell in the waters, which could be the same as Theophilatus's opinion about that being the river Nile itself. As it says here, but others said, this river is of two sexes, for they have appeared in it creatures such as have never been seen before. Another example of this would be in Moschus, a strange story which came without any explanation really out of the blue, and this is the whole of it. He says, Abba Gerontios, igumen of the monastery of our Holy Father Euthemius, told me this. There were three of us who were great gazers. Gazers were a type of monks who wore no clothes, ate no cooked food, only grasses, living beyond the Red Sea over towards Vesimunda. Once when we were walking around in the mountainside, another grazer was walking along the shore of the sea down below us. It happened that he met with some Saracens passing through the area. As they passed by him, one of the Saracens turned back and struck off the head of the anchorite. We saw all this from a distance as we were on the mountain. While we were grieving for the anchorite, suddenly a bird came over the Saracen, seized him, and carried him up into the air. It then let him drop to the ground, where he was turned into carrion. Now, the Middle East is filled with stories about mythical giant birds like Bziz of the Judaic tradition, or the Persian and Arabic Ruh, but those are more parallels than an explanation. We're never told what this bird was. So, because I can see that we're running out of time, let's summarize. There are, then, I propose 4 criteria for something, for treating something told in a late antique work, in this case, the Spiritual Meadow, as a piece of the prevalent popular beliefs or practices of the time. First, those things which were explicitly forbidden by the church and state legislation. There is nothing of the sort as we have seen in Moschus. Secondly, those stories which less obviously clash with the church tradition or teaching, as these are more subtle, they're easily found in Moschus, and also in other writers of his time. Third, those with elements someone would have found offensive enough to obey. And fourthly, there are some motifs that to us seem inexplicable, but were very likely to have been understood by the ancient audience. And I think I'd best finish here and give the microphone back to Lilia.
Okay. Okay. So I'm opening the questions, periods for questions, and I already see Jonathan raised his hand. So, Jonathan, go ahead.
That was just a clap.
Yeah. Oh, you just clapped. Okay. Yeah. I thought you raised your hand. Okay. Anyway, any questions? Oh, here we are. Now it's better. Okay. Okay. If there are no other questions, I have some questions. Well, at least one. This is from what Rastko and I are working on. Are there any stories about in the manuscripts that you read that are telling us whether the demons can deceive us about whether we are dreaming or not? Are there any mention? Is there any mention about the dreams and whether they can make us think that we are awake, but in fact we are dreaming. Like we are asking that from for our paper
Cartesian
on
perspective.
Descartes' demon. Yeah.
Usually, I don't remember any stories about someone thinking they are awake while they're dreaming. I know some folk tales do it, mostly for jokes, for laughs and giggles.
Yeah.
But dreams are, there is in Gregory the Great's dialogues, of course, a long talk about the nature of dreams and how some of them are true dreams, prophetic dreams, others are prophetic by demonic or demonic origin, and some are simply demonic dreams sent to confuse us. So demons deceive us through dreams, but they usually don't deceive us that we're dreaming or that we're awake in a dream.
Okay.
They wouldn't consider that very strange.
You're muted.
They wouldn't consider that a good enough kind of deception, I think. It's not. So even if possible, theoretically, that's not what would happen in one of these collections.
Okay, yeah, because there is this transition from late antiquity into the Middle Ages, and then like 10th, 11th, 12th century. So where there is a worrisome occurrence of the witches that say that they flew to the Shabbat, their festival, and that they were there all night in the faraway places. And then you have these, occasionally there are these monks who decide, or priests who decide to sit in the room with a woman who claims to fly to the faraway Sabbath, and they sit there and they in the morning say, well, you haven't been anywhere. So it must be that the demons deceived you. So it's all of a sudden it occurs, the deception. They conclude that there had to be some deception from the demon side, to make them believe that they flew while they were in the bed, or they took them there spiritually but not physically, something like that. But
this is far from my field of expertise. But I remember something of the sort. From the Malleus Maleficarum.
Yes, yes, but that's much later than...
Yes, much later, 14th, 15th century. There is a discussion about whether those strange things which people see are actually happening, or are they merely deceptions. That part of Malleus is especially interesting for some of the examples, for witches stealing people's bodily parts. Whereas everyone else could see that the man was not bereft of the part. He thought he was. He was still deceived, and he couldn't even see it himself. So they call it prestidigitations, demonic prestidigitations. Deceptions, but of a kind which is more bodily than simply psychological. There is that's what I randomly
okay. So, and the other question is more about your basic point, and that you summarized at the very end. So you're basically saying that would go along with what Diane said in his talk, and then and other people who are talking about the definition of superstition, and that actually superstition, or what's considered to be superstitious, is context dependent, and whatever we think today cannot be anachronically applied to this period. And the official, so you always have this official story, church, doctors, whoever is the establishment, and they are shaping or they are defining what falls within the doctrine that is acceptable, proper explanation of the world and the divine and how divine functions, and the rest that is kind of folk stories. Now, many of the folk story or folk superstitious, we would call folk superstitious now, but they wouldn't. Like
There's one point I want to make, or to restate. I don't see that as an opposition. I do think that the same people could, on one hand, define what is a majority view, and on the other hand, hold beliefs which are at loggerheads with what they are saying their whole lives. That's why I spoke about astrology. I know people who are very much astronomically capable. They know much more about astronomy than I do, but they still believe in horoscopes.
So what you're saying, it's like we expect from people coherence that nobody actually lives up to.
People are not coherent.
Yeah, they're not. Generally, that's our psychology, not to be coherent.
We don't see a problem with holding absolutely opposing worldviews
opposing beliefs.
At the same time.
Yeah, that's a nice point. Yeah, I like that. So yeah, these are the questions I had. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Anybody?
Can I pose a question?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So sorry, Rastko, I haven't seen. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Il, for a very interesting lecture. I didn't know anything about John Moschus, so it was very informative. And I wanted to get back to the context of the first question Professor Radenovic posed. So, if dreams maybe aren't seen as a relevant alternative, as a relevant way of deceiving the humans, would you be able to give to put forward a generalization of a kind to say that demons in these writings that you are focused on from Moschus, but from late antiquity and early Middle Ages as well? So, is there any most frequent way that most frequent modus operandi of demons? Is there some kind of way, or even a few ways that are most frequently encountered in these writings? So, how do demons deceive? In which ways most frequently?
There are quite a few ways to be deceived by demons. Some of them only are in ecstasy, or in vision, or in a dream. Others are very much in the waking world.
In the
waking world.
Okay.
You could see a demon, as John says often, ophthalmophanos, with your very own eyes. They seem to be, let's say, very creative about the ways in which to deceive people. Yes, there are demonic dreams. There are demonic thoughts, as inevagrios ponticus logismi, from the left, as we'd say today. And there are, of course, other more subtle means. And finally, there are even very much unsubtle means, like a monk saw the devil giving the brethren shovels and ladders in order to make them run away from the monastery. So there is not one single way for someone to be deceived. Dreams are definitely an important way, but just one of the most important ways. Demons could take a human shape, a shape of a woman, and for example, and try to seduce the monk. And some have fallen to that trap. Whether the woman in question was really a demon or not, that's another question, of course.
So, if I could put it like this, usually the actually our perception, I mean human perception, is actually is what falls victim to demons' deception, right? Are there any cases of let's say human will falling victim to demons influence, but directly, not like they not indirectly in the way of, let's say, that a false perception is what comes before our decision to do something, or the human decision. But directly, could they control the will directly? Let's say it like that.
It's a tenet of belief that demons cannot bend human will. God doesn't do it, demons can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
They can't even know what you're thinking. They can
Mm-hmm.
guess at your thoughts. They can suggest things by
Mm-hmm.
almost physically whispering into your ear. Remember, demons are themselves corporeal.
Mm-hmm.
In a way.
Yeah.
In a way.
They are part of this world, and then they exist somehow. They are created and all that.
Yes, they're not asomata anymore.
Mm.
They're gross matter. So gross matter, but somehow more subtle than our own matter is. It's a strange place. But they can't do anything to your own free will. Otherwise,
I mean, not even God, as Ilo said, not even God can make you believe or do the right thing, and that's the most important part of us, that we have free will. So
otherwise, punishment would be, and reward would be. Wouldn't be worth anything.
So they have to do it. So it's interesting because Rasko and I are interested in the part of the story where they can make things appear to us as real and as everyday life. But Augustine, for example, was more concerned with things that look like miracles, but they are not miracles. They are deceptions coming from demon, and not. So they tried to really. He tried hard to explain how that happens. Why we think of something as a miracle, but it's not. There
is an important chapter in the systematic collection of the sayings of the Desert Fathers. It's called about Peridiakrisos, about discernment. That is how to discern demonic influences and in comparison with natural ones or divine ones. The whole chapter, and it's a huge chapter in an otherwise lengthy work, is about that. And about that, it's I think the 19th chapter of the work.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. So if there are no other questions, then you're fine.
No special. Thank you very much for your lecture. No special question. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you, Il. And our next speaker is Milan Čilković. He'll be giving a lecture hopefully May 22nd. So we'll have a short break in between. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
See you.